So good afternoon, everybody. This is Anto Buriajo. Welcome to Monday Live, something we do every Monday at 3 o'clock Eastern. And MondayLive.org is where you go to see profiles, our profiles, people on the show. Just a reminder that views expressed here are personal, not of any company or organization. Please do use the comment and chat tools of Zoom, and also a reminder that this slide deck will be on MondayLive.org in case you want any of the links that we have on it. So this month we are talking about clarity. We're trying to figure out whether we have clarity or not. So we'll continue this dialogue today. Today we're going to be talking about if we have any clarity from a sort of Washington, D.C. Federal government perspective. So we have a couple of guests that's going to be talking about that. That's related to the work that's going on with the coalition. So looking forward to that. Before that, hand it over to Ken.
Thanks, Anto. Yes, so we've got our issue online, creating clarity. Where we say our success depends on bringing clarity to the complex. And turns out it's easy to say that, but as we started defining clarity and tried to be clearer, it's tough. And so I'm writing my article for Connected Contractor, and I've added to creating clarity of the change, because that seems to be the common theme, is trying to define what it is we are now doing, not what we were used to be doing, but what we're doing now, because it's significantly different than what we were doing. And the clarity, a lot is inside of doing a good job of defining the change. We had a great Monday Live Zoom discussion that Anto hosted from Realcomm. And in addition to that, one of our members, Mark Peacock, ran away with all of the honors there as the Lifetime Achievement Award. I'm a little worried what that means is if he thinks he gets out, that's not part of the deal. He still has to keep on doing all the things he's doing, which is lots. I think that's important too. He's obviously our contributing editor, plus executive secretary of Project Haystack, and he's heading up our 9th annual Connection Community Collaboratory in Vegas. And he's got that insights, trends, perspective, and an open conversation with the industry. So congratulations to Mark and all he does and all he continues to do, and all we hope he keeps continue doing. Looking forward to the discussion today. It's going to be interesting to see how this significant change in infrastructure funding is going to affect our industry. Back to you, Anto.
Thank you, and congratulations, Mark, on that. And over to you, Mark.
Thanks all, appreciate it. So as part of this whole clarity effort, I've been doing some polls and some LinkedIn polls. So I thought I'd share 4 with the group today. So, and the polls say, of the following 4 subjects being talked about within the C-suite, which one do you believe is the most important? For me, cybersecurity, that number 39%, no surprise at all. Inflation, supply chain challenges, return to office. What did surprise me though on this particular poll was the high number of the supply chain challenges, which again is still here. Everybody's going through it, so maybe that's why. But then look how low in respect to the other numbers, return to office, just 11%. Kind of interesting there. And again, it was open to LinkedIn. It wasn't just our industry. It was a general poll in LinkedIn. The next one I did was our state and local government building standards for performance, IAQ, and carbon reduction inevitable. And no surprise, everybody, 82%. No was minuscule at 6% and maybe 2%. I've got 2 more. Next slide, Anto. And continuing on, do you agree the way a building is operated and managed is part of a company's organization's brand. 70% said yes, 6% no, possibly 24%. I was a little disappointed in this results. I had hoped that the yes number would have been in and around 85 to 90%. So this is an area for me personally that I'm going to be talking and writing about over the next couple of months or so, as far as the importance of what we do collectively in the industry, making buildings smarter, is part of an organization's brand. And the last one, this is one of these outer space ones, if you ask me, is as talk of metaverse escalates, will it be a distraction from the real talk that is needed to continue about smarter buildings? As you can see there, no at 48%, yes at 33%, and maybe possibly 19%. So again, keeping with our theme for this month, clarity, hopefully this provides some type of clarity for us all, both the Monday Live group as well as those who are joining us today and whatever. So there you have it. Back to you, Anto.
Hey, Mark, a quick
Thank
comment
you.
on
Yeah.
your, the brand issue. You can't get 85 to 90% of people to agree the sky is blue. So I think 7.
Thanks.
Yeah, and a lot of the 24 is probably a yes, they didn't want to commit.
Yeah, exactly. 70 plus 24, it's overwhelming, frankly,
Mhm.
in terms of
Yeah.
the importance. So, it's a little bit like saying, do you strongly support the candidate, or do you sort of, maybe you support the candidate?
Maybe.
Anybody that, it's still a positive answer.
Yeah, perhaps it's the 6% that needs to be considered as
Yeah.
the low number.
Mm.
Okay. Thank you. John.
Yeah, some excerpts here on the topic I've been contributing on is, moving to net zero, clarification of what that means, greenwashing, et cetera. So I thought this was interesting from one of the real estate magazines, Wealth Management, growing momentum, but a clear statement that, the good Samaritan theory of economics won't work. There has to be economic incentives, and regulatory may be one of those that drive it. And I think we're seeing signs of that, and we're seeing some actual regulatory things, but I think we're seeing more signs of it. That's the only way it's going to happen large scale in the built environment. So it's we're taking a look at that article and the different people that weighed in on the topic.
Actually, just to that, John, the big one I heard this morning was M&M, the candy manufacturer, just pledged to go to net zero by 2025 or 2026 as a manufacturer. So that'd be interesting to watch how they do that.
It's funny. I just read an article this morning too about the semiconductor industry and their efforts to go towards net zero. And right now they're going in the opposite direction due to the increased demand. So an average large semiconductor foundry, like take Taiwan Semiconductor, emits more greenhouse gases than General Motors does.
Wow.
By far. And it's gone up like 300% in the past 18 months. So.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
Anno.
Yeah, I think just talking a bit more about change and what's going on in the marketplace from a change perspective, as Ken alluded to at the beginning. 3 interesting ones I picked up this last week. AB&B Technology Ventures, they did a big Series A investment in a BrainBox. I think it was about 24 million AI, BrainBox AI. That was this week. MRI Software, if you guys know those people, they're kind of interesting group. Have a lot of apps in the real estate software marketplace. They just acquired eSite. So if you guys are familiar with eSite Energy, Janie Jeffries and crew, they just got acquired by MRI. And then Planon, I thought this one was interesting too. Planon and Orthograph. Orthograph, if you haven't seen them, they do some interesting stuff. They did some early day digital twin software that kind of worked early in the day. but Plan On and Orthograph have teamed together to do a digital twin visualization functionalities. Kind of interesting stuff.
Okay, thank you, Anna. I had a couple of things. First one on net zero. I think this essentially numbers that's coming out of Glasgow or for the activities there. I thought these numbers are kind of pretty interesting comparing the countries. China's obviously at the top there with its largest share of emissions. The net zero target years all over the place, if you look at that. But obviously the renewable percentage renewable of China and India are actually pretty high, which is obviously very good. But you see there the impact of China's consumption of coal, which is kind of very worrying. So it's kind of just interesting to look at this at the macro level.
I guess our challenge with this, Anto, is that we all did it for hundreds of years. India and China and to some extent Russia, I guess, are playing catch up to some extent compared with what we were. And I guess all we can do is encourage them to do it quicker.
Yeah, which is the reason why the target years are so far out for China and for India and for Russia. But
that
really
ties back into the story I was talking about in the semiconductor industry. They also cited that coal was the #1 fuel used in semiconductor manufacturing.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. That's a shock.
Indirectly, obviously.
Why do you think that is, Tracy?
Well, most of the semiconductor manufacturing is done in Taiwan, China in particular, and that's just their source of fuel there
Of
for
energy,
that.
yeah, right. So it's the lowest cost energy that it can come up with today. Yep.
Yeah, it's just geographically dependent.
Yep.
And my second piece is what we'll hopefully be talking about in a minute. Finally, it's Infrastructure Week. Yay. Whatever that means. And we're going to figure that out. And I'm not quite sure whether it was last week Infrastructure Week or this week, or whether anybody really cares. I don't think anybody
Infrastructure year.
Okay, so we should now move on to the topic of clarity. I'm going to bring on two guests. Where can I find Roshan? There you go. Roshan Patel, who is working for the coalition, and Rick. Where are you, Rick? Justice, there you go. And Rick Justice also with the coalition. Rick is the managing director of the coalition. So Roshan and Rick, welcome to the show. How are you guys doing today? You're muted, Roshan. There you go.
Doing great. Thank you, Anto. How are you? Great to see everybody.
Great to see you, Roshan. So have three questions for you, Roshan and Rick, and you can take them in any order. But basically, the first point is really sort of from a politics perspective. Obviously, there was a lot of anticipation of the elections last week, and now that's we're over that. We're past that. Get rid of the share. What does it look like in DC? What's the sort of the dynamics, and what is the sort of the likelihood of the continuation of Biden's agenda? So why don't we talk about that first?
Yeah, absolutely. Anto, and if that's to me, I'll just jump in. Well, thank you again, Anto. You and the other folks on this call who I've met some in person. So great to see you again. And for those that I've not had the opportunity to meet, great to meet you via this computer screen. Hope everyone's doing well. I guess, your question, hey, Rick, your question specifically about Joe Biden and the administration and their goals in Washington, D.C. and in Congress. I guess we have to take maybe a step back and look at what happened last Tuesday that may dictate a little bit about what potentially could happen in Congress. We had a big election, and I think since we've engaged in this effort and this conversation, not just around more efficient and smarter buildings and energy efficiency, et cetera, but as far as where this potential policy goes, I was saying for a long time, we really needed to wait to see what happened in Virginia and New Jersey to get a better sense of where we are politically. Obviously, we know where we are in DC when it comes to governing. You've got a Democratic White House, a Democratic House, though narrow in its majority, and then a Democratic Senate, even more narrow in its majority, being at 50-50. But what we saw heading into Tuesday, and I think what we've seen after, obviously President Biden's first midterm election, first major election since his being sworn in last November. We had 2 elections this year, Virginia and New Jersey, and by and large, we saw major Republican success. If you look at the president's approval rating across the country, specifically in those 2 states, they're underwater at 43%, the lowest the president's been in 11 months. Clearly had a role in the electorate and who showed up and what folks, how folks viewed this particular election. In Virginia, after 8 years of Democratic control in the governor's mansion and 4 years of control in the House and the Senate, we saw a flip. We saw a Republican beating former Governor Terry McAuliffe in that governor's race. And in Virginia, for those of you that know or don't know, that's a one-term governor. So you're only allowed 4 years. You can't run consecutively. So Terry was governor 2 governors ago and came back for a second term. And Glenn Youngkin, the Republican one. Republicans were also able to do was take over the House and win the lieutenant governor's race in a tied Senate. So essentially you have full Republican control in Richmond. What we saw just 4 states or whatever north in New Jersey, what by and large most folks assumed was going to be a Democratic reelection for Governor Phil Murphy, we are potentially going to be in a recount in a very, very, very tight election. It is a half a point, if not better. So I think what we've seen, if this is prelude of what's to come over the next year, is that Republicans have momentum. You have 36 governor's races. You have the House and the Senate that are all up next year, with Republicans currently in the driver's seat to take over Congress in the House, the Senate, and we'll see what happens at the state legislature and gubernatorial level. That said, what happened 3 days after the election was the passing of the infrastructure bill. 6 Democrats defected in the House, 13, I think, Republicans voted for it, giving the president a big win. And I think just in all things, and I think in politics specifically, we don't necessarily view this passing of the infrastructure bill as a success for the president because of the last few months of the back and forth. But if the Senate were to pass it and the House were to pass it a week later, this would have been deemed a big success. But I think there's clearly a communication deficiency coming out of Washington right now. You are seeing the moderates and the progressives sort of at odds as the governing party and the party in control. And I think the election was a bit of a wake-up call for Pelosi, Schumer, and Biden to pull folks together to try to come together and help move the president's agenda. The infrastructure package is done. The new Build Back Better legislation is still out there. And we'll see over the next few weeks where that goes. So, Anto, that was very high level. I'd be happy to talk about approval numbers and who turned out and where, but I at least just wanted to put a bit of a level set of what happened.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's I think the level that we want. Just sort of moving on to the infrastructure bill. There's obviously continues to be confusion about that bill and the Build Back Better, right? And so for this group of people and for the audience that's very focused on smart buildings, and also to you, Roshan, and also Rick, what does this infrastructure bill do for this industry, and where should we point our excitement or our enthusiasm?
Well, Rick,
I was just going to say, in the context of evidence of our message has importance and has meaning, and now we're sort of looking and make sure we kind of go back over that and acknowledge that yes, what we're trying to do does have a place. Now we're trying to figure out what place and how big is that place.
And Rick, I would say it's and Anto, I think what we saw out of the infrastructure bill itself, the 1.2 trillion, I think, not a significant amount dedicated to this particular effort, but a step in the right direction. And quite frankly, I think that step is promising, where you have the thought leaders around this computer screen and across the country that are tuning in. You have the coalition, the C4SB, that has come together to drive home, first of all, to create a message, and then to drive home that message and to build a communications platform. I view it promising. Still not enough from an investment standpoint. But I think everybody would tell you that the infrastructure bill was more about roads and bridges and broadband, and the Build Back Better bill is more about the climate and other priorities of the administration that is viewed maybe more partisan. And so I think this effort is really just a step in the right direction. I think this group and this echo chamber is important because it continues to push the effort. Gene Shaheen, Rob Portman, what they were able to insert, and Rick even mentioned it, not a ton, but a little bit. It shows sort of who those thought leaders are in DC, and maybe people that should be our audience as we continue this effort.
So, Roshan, is it possible now that the bill passed that there's some place we could actually look at it, define what provisions in there that might be relevant to this industry? Because I'm particularly interested in whether it's government facilities or there's additional DOE funding. Are there any line item provisions that actually we should be aware of? Because if we're not looking, are the people not on this call, which generally can be some of the big four in this industry, they will be looking at that. And I think it's really important to this group and our audience that we get very specific about things that might be germane that we can act on right now. So is there a way to find the bill easily?
There is, Steve, and the answer to that is yes. And I would say there are probably 3 or 4 things we should be thinking about as it relates to provisions related to us.
Yep.
Number one, and I would say probably where this administration really wants to go, and I think where the industry was going, not our industry, but the real estate industry, is these sort of smarter cities that we often hear about. I just, and Rick and I have spoken at length about this, about engaging the group and its individual members around the Amazon HQ headquarters 2, HQ2, that was awarded in National Landing, Crystal City, Virginia. Treasury, Commerce, DOE, and DOT are going to have a big hand in sort of how that smart city is created. And it's going to be about broadband. It's going to be about affordable housing. It's going to be about mobility. And it's going to be about energy efficiency and smarter buildings. And they are very tuned in on what that particular smart city will look like, primarily because it's so close to Washington, D.C. And they feel like they have a greater hand in that. But these
And-
hubs, these smarter cities are going to be popping up around the country. And we will be a part of that conversation. You obviously
So-
have,
So are you saying that the bill has some specific provisions around that?
yes,
Okay,
obviously
The
manufacturing,
the infrastructure bill.
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and obviously manufacturing is a big one. We continue to talk about as a country, onshoring manufacturing, bringing jobs back here. The chip shortage during COVID was a big driver of that, or maybe reignited that. Making sure those manufacturing facilities run cleaner, smarter, more efficient, et cetera. I think was it Mark that did the polling earlier that that talked about some of the C-suite polling? What is, how do we view our corporations, and what do they view as our priorities? That's a big one. Relocation of our human capital. What sort of building do they work in? Where do they work? What that looks like. That's a big one. So I thought those numbers were very interesting, because I do think that correlates to where the corporate company, corporations are heading in that. So Steve, we'll get that, maybe package it up and kick that around.
yeah, that would be really helpful because we'd like to post that, at least a
Sure.
link to it.
Yeah, we can put that up on the coalition website. That should be up on there. So sort of moving on to the Build Back Better, which is obviously the budget reconciliation sort of thing that most people outside of DC find totally confusing, but never mind. What is the state of that, and what is the expectation in DC and for you and your colleagues that you speak to on a daily basis?
Well, look, I think the Build Back Better plan is sort of been the spur in Manchin's saddle this whole time, and I think that's really where you see the progressives and the moderate a bit at odds on this. As a recap, very quickly, very confusing, and only Congress can make it this undigestible. But obviously you had the bipartisan infrastructure bill that passed the Senate earlier this year in August with 19 Republicans in addition to all Democrats, moved to the House. The House punted on it and put together a reconciliation package that had a lot of the progressive priorities in it that they thought the bipartisan infrastructure package did not. So you had two pieces of legislation that the progressives wanted to move at the same time, basically saying, we'll give the moderates and the White House a win on the infrastructure package, but we want everything else. Climate, a big driver of this, huge driver of this, along with some other provisions through the reconciliation package and passing them both at the same time. Well, that got us from August to last Friday. Nothing moved until the infrastructure package passed the House. It's now sitting in front of the president. But you talk about Build Back Better, Anto, or you ask about it. This is the sticking point, and I think this is really probably the wedge that is dividing the moderates. And really, it's not the moderates. It's Manchin and Sinema, maybe a couple of others. That is the biggest divider between them and the Progressive Caucus, which, remember, after 2018, Trump midterm, you're looking at about 100 members of that caucus. So a real voting bloc in the House. Where it is, Anto, I mean, we don't really know. That's not a good answer, I know. But they're still working around the edges on this. Obviously, Manchin is pushing back on, and many say he had a hand in the US, not totally cutting out coal in Scotland. There are a lot of these negotiations that are not just happening through the legislation, but also as the White House governs and puts regulations in place. So I think we're still Congress is out this week. They're going to be back in their districts. I think we still probably have another week or two to really get a better sense of maybe the direction we think this is going post infrastructure bill getting done.
Great. That's really great update on what's going on. Appreciate that. I think the question that everybody's trying to sort of figure out maybe on the screen here on the audience is, what can we all do independently? Most of us work on a local basis. Local government and state government is about as far as most of us care to think about. What can we do? How can we make this all work? How can we amplify the message that the coalition and that we're all trying to do? What can people do? And that's for both you and Roshan and Rick. This is really kind of where things happen. Rick, you want to start?
Well, I'll just say one more thing and then I'll shut up. I'm hogging the mic. I'll say, I think, honestly, conversations like this are very helpful. These are the thought leaders. If you look at where the conversation is around climate, and I think we talked about this when we were in person a couple of weeks ago, it's transitioning coal to clean energy facilities and EV infrastructure. That is really it. Can we get rid of coal and fossil fuels? And can we get rid of these combustible engines and put more electric vehicles on the roads? And that's kind of it. And that's what we hear about. Those are the sort of the big line items that we continue to hear about. But what we know, what the folks on this call know more than anything, is the efficiency conversation and how that cleans up the climate, et cetera.
So, Roshan, can I interrupt for a quick second? Is the bill number 3684, is that the one that passed? Do you know? Is that the right number?
I don't think it is, but I'm actually not sure on the number. But
yeah,
let me look at it.
It's called the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act.
I think that's it.
All right. So I was just scanning the sort of the outline of it, and there are specific rebate programs and efficiency programs for schools and other institutions in this bill, or supposedly. I don't know what the final bill looks like. That's why. So there's line items specific to energy conservation in different sections of the bill, and that's the kind of thing I was suggesting we identify and find out what those programs are and how they work, because sharing that with this audience is what they need to know. They can go pursue.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you. But then the other thing that I would say is sort of the effort around the C4SB and the communications platform that exists there to help continue to push message out. I'm able to be on calls and sit in meetings, and I hear about sort of the top 5 priorities that Rick continues to educate me on, and make me smarter about these issues. And I would say if there are a couple that really ring a bell, workforce is a big one. The data piece, the analytics piece that this group is as good, if not better than anybody to be able to put together, are huge drivers. And I think using the brain power within this greater collection of folks, but also through the coalition, honing in on that message, amplifying it as BBB continues to move, is I think the reason that Rick was smart enough and sort of had the wherewithal foresight to pull this thing together. So I'll defer to Rick on the coalition piece, but the timing is is really pretty good for it.
So having the
So Rick, just thinking of the audience out in various states around the country, what can they do? What should they be thinking or doing in the next few weeks?
what I think is Roshan described there's now the structure politically, there's the will, there's acknowledgement. And now as an industry, I think we got this feedback that what we're doing is going to be really critical for all of these different political agendas, whether they're at a state level, a governor level, a school board, or at a federal level. And anticipating that there was going to be this awareness and interest, I think we got a little bit ahead, which is good, and that we got ahead of the game to create the five talking points about what works needs to be done, to get some of the tools together, like the smarter stack and a vision framework. And if we continue to have these conversations and clarify, getting as many people as possible to understand where their personal interest, their business interest aligns with the political agenda, some of these structures that we're putting together, whether it's the smarter stack or the 5 pillars of the coalition, these help to bring the conversations, or have the same talking points be repeated over and over, and different people are hearing them. And then being sort of ready. This is what Roshan has always been so good at over the years, being ready when the opportunity presents itself, to be ready to talk to a committee, or to give expert testimony, or to talk to your local media and or policymakers, whether it's a school board person or a mayor or a governor or a governor candidate. But being on the same page relative to some of these issues, knowing that our message is interesting and important, and being ready when these opportunities get more specific and on the ground. Again, kind of general, but the main thing for me is that I think that we've seen that we are getting this feedback that what we do for a living is actually really now critical, and how we organize our thoughts around it, how we present it is just a communications effort, and we've got all these experts to help do that. And Mark Peacock, by the way, you've got a future in political polling. If Roshan wasn't going to say it, I'm going to say it.
No thanks. But since you so one of the pieces that I think is different this time around, just in general with all of this, is that what is an ally for this industry that we did not have previously? Let's face it, we've had the technology, we all know, everybody on this call exists. It's proven. It's not, oh, we have to wait for the next greatest thing. We don't. It's all exists now. But the one thing that is different that I see is that what is helping drive this is what I will call a public relations effort that many corporations globally have publicly come out and said, we are going to do this by such and such a date. That was never part of the conversation over these last many years that we've kind of been discussing this. And the fact that they have publicly come out and said by, as I said, such and such a date, that they are serious. And the fact that they are getting pressure from not only their employees, but people who are purchasing their products and or service, whether it be B2B, B2C, it really does not matter. And I think that's a major differentiating point that we have, let's just call it, on our side this time around.
And just to expand on that, Mark, and I think to point back to Roshan and Rick's I agree with you 100%, right? There's definitely a market pull, but not to undersell, what we're doing here, what we've done with the Coalition for Smart Buildings. I don't think there was a unified voice either in this space, right? I mean, all of us have been talking about it and been in the space, but I think having a unified voice on the supply side, so I agree. I think there's a strong demand side, people are asking for solutions, and then I think people like us coming together and coming as a unified voice is a strong part of the equation as well.
Does that resonate in DC circles? Let's put it that way, Roshan.
Absolutely. I mean, without a doubt, and I think it'll only get better as the coalition grows and builds and continues to have a unified voice. I mean, the fact that we feel like there was a olive branch around our issues in this latest piece of legislation is a good thing. Now, if they could have hit a grand slam, that's great. But the fact that it coincides with this effort is remarkable. And I mean, I think that momentum is important to continue to develop on as we head into the end of the year, but really into next year. There's going to be an onus to get some things done before the elections. And there's going to be a chorus of voices on different priorities that are going to be lining up. So the fact that we have what we think is a very good chorus of voice led by some very smart people is great.
So opening up to the group and people in.
So a quick question. I think from previous, I mean, obviously it's the US initiative thing, but from previous experiences is that things tend to kick off when public funding becomes available, i.e. there's incentives to schools and hospitals, a little bit like Steve was mentioning, and the private sector tends to follow. They rarely lead, believe it or not. So you get that. Is there something in this that you're, with this bill and things to actually provide that funding for the public type buildings?
So I would say that is typically the case, Roger. But it's sort of that you get some public funding that kind of jumpstarts the private sector. I that is generally the case. That has less so been the case around this particular issue in my experience and practice, and I do defer to y'all on this. I think you're seeing the private sector lead a little bit around this, and I think you have the public sector acknowledging that work and applauding it, and hopefully meeting the industry and supporting its current efforts to then grow that work. And so I think that is usually the case. But the fact that we have 50 people on this call, if not more, that have had a hand in these efforts around the country and that in some cases around the world, I think it's a little maybe tail wagging the dog a little bit.
Okay.
Other thoughts and comments of those?
When we were in Washington, your lobbyist colleague pointed out that once the bill was passed, the real work would start in the executive branch in the different divisions of government. How can we get into a dialogue with those branches of the executive to help them start setting rational policy, whether there's money available or not? How can we reach out and get more involvement with FAMP, DOE, U.S. General Services Administration, et cetera?
Great question. And I think that is true. And I think if nothing were to happen, I think you would see this administration lean in on the regulation side, right? Because the legislative side didn't come through. So you would have seen involvement one way or the other. I think the work that the coalition so far has done, developing a great relationship with DOE and the White House is is great, Rick, and that Rick can talk more about that. But I think that is an important step because the coalition now is not developing a relationship while this work is being done. The relationship already exists. So I applaud everybody on this call and the coalition for doing that.
Is there a way to climb down into the program management level or have some of these people introduce us to some of the decision makers that are lower down in the executive branch? What's our best route for plumbing those depths?
I'll defer to Rick.
Well, it seems like we've got a quite, not a bad start with some help on that, given the context at the White House and DOE, Commerce. Sure, Roshan sort of knows some of those secretaries of those departments, which might come in handy at a certain point. But finding out who the people are that are running the different departments, or as you said, Jim, that the different programs themselves, I think we've got a pretty good start. Now knowing what the lay of the land is and the politics and the budgets that are being set, we will network and then find the right strategic communications and the people to reach out. And it's a networking game of who knows who and how the interests align. But we did, as Russ had said when we were in DC, Russ Carnahan had said, and Roshan had said the same thing, is that we kind of needed to see what was going to happen with the way this politics and that election shook out, for people to see what the tea leaves say going forward. But Roshan maybe hit on this again, that there's another election in another 11 and a half months or 12 months. And what happens between now and then? Do things that you described an urgency to show some progress? In my experience, the beginning of administrations is when a lot of work gets done so they can show something. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just say, I think I want to drive home the point that the fact that the coalition before it started and in its sort of inception has continued to have conversations with folks like DOE. I think we're looking at potentially having conversations with the White House and Commerce, who Commerce is leading the innovation stuff around these smart buildings. So I think we should continue to double down on that. As it relates to the elections, and again, I do think this is important because the elections are nothing more than a marker of time. And, what this particular White House and Congress intends to do or not do, in many cases, will be determined over the next few months. And I think the sort of catalyst was last Tuesday night during the elections. 3 days later, the infrastructure package passed. Now I think the third leg of the stool, if you will, is everything's focusing in on the BBB, on the Build Back Better. But next year, as we just look, and I do think it's important, and it has nothing to do with D or R, but I think you have to look at the gravity of or the weight of the elections next year. You have 36 governors races next year, next November, in 1 year. You have you have a third, obviously, of the Senate that is up for election or re-election in a tied Senate. And then you have the entire House up in a chamber that has, I think, a 6-seat majority, but 100 of the majority party is part of a caucus that has been very loud and clearly demonstrative and effective in trying to push their goals. So I think that is important because I think we do have a bit of a window of time in which I hope we can continue to build our message, push our message out through this platform, because I think as we get into the summer months, that window is essentially going to close. They're going to head back to the States, and it's going to be all about the election. And who knows what the makeup of Congress and looks like, next January. So it's not a hair on fire situation, but when you're in politics, it's always a hair on fire situation, but I do think that we've got some momentum that would be great to build and grow a little bit to help us be a little louder.
So Sabine just posted a comment talking about workforce. That is one of the 5 pillars of action of the coalition. So we're very much on top of that subject. Melissa Boutwell is not on the call today, but she's been driving that really strongly. We talked about that, I think, a couple of weeks ago. And also Sabine was making comments about the impact of all of that to promote BAS and buildings as a critical place for successful infrastructure and climate change. I think the bit that I get confused about is that I understand the relationship to climate, and I sort of understand the relationship to infrastructure, because buildings is kind of broadly part of the broader infrastructure term. The thing that always worries me is that most of the infrastructure bill is really about roads and bridges, which we all need, and airports. And that really is not very close to the areas that we care about. So I don't know whether that's that division is the correct way of looking at things or not.
Steve sent around a breakdown of the major titles in the bill, and one of them did I happen to agree with you about that concern, Anto, but one of them, section 40554, assisting federal facilities with energy conservation technologies, a grant program, right? Oftentimes, you talk to the federal facilities and they don't have budget because it doesn't fit in the normal budgets, as we find for many building operators, right? Their budgets are very tied to how it's always been done, right? And don't include funds that can make investments. So that one that I've been able to look at, may be helpful to the types of things that most of the people on this call are focused on.
Yeah, Sabine just chimed in again. Isn't the grid part of the infrastructure? I didn't think so.
It appears to be. There's at least the version of the bill that I found online that I sent a link to had a huge section on the grid for grid reliability, grid cybersecurity, safety. So if it's still there, then that is going to be important to, was it Tristan's company who does the grid stuff?
Tristan, yeah.
Yeah. So, but in all of us, that's going to pull through, I would think, some kind of business. But that's why I think, guys, we got to delve in the details, and we need to get the actual text and sort of divide and conquer and figure out what's in there that might be that we can really act on.
My experience in grid and smart grid from 10 years ago indicates it's actually a different world altogether. It's really more focused on the utility side and the whole sort of grid infrastructure, which doesn't really come into the consumption side of the grid, which is where buildings sit.
Yeah, no argument. I can't, you can't really discern it from the, if you will, the outline of the table of contents, whatever you want to call it. But that's why we need to get the text of the bill and scan it for what we care about.
Question for Roshan and Rick. Who's actually writing the text of these bills? Is this basically lobbyists shoving this across to staffers that are, what is the path of creation of the language that Steve is talking about? Where does it come from?
Right.
Yeah, some of it comes from downtown, some of it comes from think tanks, and some of it comes from just past work of whatever particular member is interested in that particular area. So it's kind of a catch-all. Some of it is regurgitated or recycled, if you will, from past failed efforts in Congress as well.
On BBB, is there a way we should be having dialogues with our members or people now to set that dialogue, or is it just way too late?
No, I think BBB is
too
moving.
early?
No one is or wants to get in the way of the train, that the two trains colliding the moderates and the progressives. I think this is we are smart to let this play out and engage once something is done. You know, I think the more anybody rears their ugly head, the more anybody tries to push either side, do so at your own peril.
Isn't it true that most of the debates on BBB is around the sort of social infrastructure part of things? That's the sort of the conflict areas.
There's some of the family infrastructure, social infrastructure
Right.
is a part of it. But remember, some of the climate conversations are being held as a negotiating factor around it. So you can't take the energy piece out of it.
Okay. Any other thoughts from the crew here or the audience? Do we feel? Hey, Ken, maybe push it back to you. Do you feel any level of clarity here?
Clear as mud.
You're muted. Ken, you're muted.
I'd say American politics has always challenged my clarity of life.
Okay, so Rick, tell us what's next with the coalition and how we can help all of this get pointed the right way over the next few weeks.
Well, I think there's what's the cliche of luck being the combination of preparation and something. The preparation, you know, being prepared is probably what we have. I think thankfully we've gotten ahead of the game, as described before, in some alignment with DOE, alignment with CQ, alignment with others, and getting some things done. What you've done with the Smarter Stack, what we've done with the specification work, what all the time that's gone in, and thank you guys all for all the work, the time and the feedback from the people on this call for getting ready for that moment where after the train wreck happens, when there's this scramble for putting in place useful, impactful, meaningful change that can be measured and can be, as I said, impactful. But the things like the specification that can give guidance, the definition around interoperability, plans for workforce, and a template for somebody to go either win that grant or make the grant be more impactful. I think we're going to look at what is happening with the governor's races to target some of those. We're going to look at some mayors and some specific cities. We've had some really good successes now with a couple of school districts that could set for some real nice templates for smarter school districts that encompass the indoor air quality, workforce development, energy modeling. So with what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, I think we'll try and keep pressing forward for completion of some of this work, and then sharing some of what it is, and not just posting it on the internet, but getting feedback and getting involvement, and hopefully more and more people to get that preparation done, and then make it look like we were lucky, as things roll out over the next year or so.
Yeah. Luck is what happens when preparation meets opportunity. Somebody just posted. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So with that, let's bring this to a wrap. Thank you very much for Roshan for joining us, and Rick. We're very excited. I think basically what you're saying, Rick, is that we still got work to do here in Monday Live. We've got stuff to write and we've got work to do. That's fine. That's what we're here for. So thank you all for joining us, and we'll have a video of this up by tomorrow morning, and we'll join you again next week. Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Hey guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay.